he treats your daughter mean. Mama, he treats your daughter mean. He's the meanest man I've ever seen. Mama, he treats me badly, makes me love him madly. Mama, he takes my money, makes me call him honey. Mama, he can't be trusted, makes me so disgusted. All of my friends say they don't understand what's the matter with this man.
We are filming a jazz archive for Hamilton College, and we are very flattered and privileged to have Ruth Brown, one of the greatest rhythm and blues singers there's ever been, and we want to ask you some questions about your lifestyle and what was going on at the times that you started singing and some of the other great artists that you've worked with and what all this music means. Tell us in your definition, what is rhythm and blues?
Really basic, and in my day, really black is what it meant. But I'm entitled, or I think I find it necessary to say that that explanation is not necessarily the best one, because rhythm and blues has affected all cultures. It has crossed all lines. I'm amazed that even now in the later years when we have the opportunity to travel outside the United States, which I didn't get that opportunity when I was young and physically able to handle it. But now that we do, when we go out of the country, I usually am concerned that because of the language barrier and not being able to speak the language, that there'll be some problem with presenting the music. And so far, that has not been a problem, because this music jumps every barrier that there is, because it is basically rhythm. It is basically simple melody. It is basically a music that we can duplicate almost to the letter, even these many years afterwards, because when it was done in the beginning, it was not over amplified. It was not done in the entertainer's or engineer's booth, if I must say. Not a lot of overdubbing, not a lot of reverbs and that kind of thing. So consequently, when you make a personal appearance, if you have a good six-piece band, you can make this music sound almost the way it did. Of course, now we have to sort of change the tempos, because the new generation don't want to drag the way we did. So the tempos have been upped a little bit. But
tell me about some of those slower tempos. What else was going on while they were?
Oh, we called it, if you will excuse the expression, coffee grinding music.
Okay.
I knew that's what you wanted me to say, because that's what it was. You know, we called it coffee grinding music, and I'm very proud to say that I sang some of that and saw a lot of that going on. We said coffee grinding because it was such a personal kind of an attitude that it wanted and required and made you want to hold somebody really close to you. You know, you could really hold on to somebody and relate to what was being played or sung by the artist. And as I always say in my act, you just got yourself a dark spot and held on and moved from the waist down. That's why it's lasting.
Yeah.
Because it spoke of love, and love is continuous.
You say, though, that this music, my thoughts of early rhythm and blues was that this music had something incredibly alive in it, because it was basically being sung and performed by black performers for predominantly black audiences.
Yes.
So
yes.
there was a communal effect there. Could you talk about that communal effect?
Yes.
Could you talk about the music also being need-based?
Yeah, well, the reason that what you say is very true is because at that time, when I first began recording, which was in 1948, the music that I sang, or that other artists like myself, Jackie Wilson, the Drifters, the Clovers, the Flamingos, Chuck Willis, Roy Brown, Charles Brown, Wynonie Harris, to name only a few, was referred to as race music.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not played by your top 100 stations.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, every southern town had a local radio station. The wattage wasn't so powerful that you could hear what they played up north, so to speak. But there was one station that was very responsible for this music being heard as far east and west as it was. And that was a small radio station in Gallatin, Tennessee, called Randy's Record Shop. Now, what was unknown to the listening public was that the disc jockey at that station was a country and western person. He was white, he was not black. But he had the love for this music. He had the most popular radio station that there was called Randy's Record Shop. And that is how the voice of Ruth Brown got to be heard as far as California, as far as Chicago, you know, all the Midwest, even though I was basically located in Virginia, which was my state of origin.
Something I wanted to ask you is these records were not always nationally distributed either, were they?
Not at
what
all.
they call mom and pop record stores?
Yes, indeed.
Tell us about
And you
that.
could buy them locally in your neighborhood, and they would probably order 100 maybe from the record companies and get rid of that 100 at one time and then order more. And if you must remember now, in those days, we had the huge 78s,
Mm-hmm.
breakable. And a lot of times, from the artist's point of view, you were told that so many promotional records were broken in distribution or in the mails, and so consequently, by the time you got your royalty statement, that was written off as a loss. You know, as in those days, most everything we did was written up on the royalty statement. That is the reason we are fighting even now for royalties, because in the days that I was recording, we were charged for everything. Studio time, musicians, manuscripts, promotional copies, distribution, everything. If they sent out and brought some sandwiches in for lunch, it was on my bill, you know. But the music transcended all of that, and as I say, it was very personal in that we had to go to the people to present this music.
Uh-huh.
And when I say go to the people, I mean go wherever there was a place that enabled them to dance. Most times it would be a barn or a warehouse.
Uh-huh.
And in the warehouse, depending on what time of the season we went, if it was cotton time, the cotton was still packed up on one side. If they had been harvesting tobacco, tobacco was stacked up on one side. And if it was cold weather, a lot of times there was a barrel, a big oil drum in the center of the floor with a flame burning. People would dance and then go over and warm your hands and go back and dance some more. Most times the stages were not what you see now. They were most times flatbed trucks that had been rolled together and put some bricks under the wheels to keep them from rolling. And that was your stage. That's where you performed, you know.
How did you, when you traveled from town to town, how did you deal with the hotels or lack of hotels?
There were none most times. Lack of hotels is what it was. What you had to do was you always left in time to get into the city where you were going to work and get there early enough to go down on what we call the main drag. You know, you'd get in town and not know just where to go. And when you'd ask instructions, usually they would say to you, find the railroad track. And once you find the railroad track, cross over. You understand? And once you get on the other side of the track, that's where you're going to be performing in that immediate area. So what you did was get down to the main street, go to the local restaurant. The fellas would find the local barber shops. At that time, they were having the do's, you know, with the do-rags and whatnot. And they had to find somebody to comb that.
Yeah.
But you would get into that neighborhood and inquire of somebody most times who had a house and some extra rooms. There were a lot of what you call tourist homes.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying? And you'd go and get a room there. And I can remember many times, and I've gone in and people have like doubled their children up and took the room the children were sleeping in to give to me and my assistant or something, and members of the band. Usually there was a restaurant, and upstairs they would have some rooms. And that's where we would stay. I mean, we did not have the opportunity to visit the Holiday Inns, believe me. That was not possible.
One other thing I want to ask you, talk to us about how the music made the difference. You said when they used to have the dances, they'd like have a rope.
Oh, yes.
And the whites would be on one side and the blacks would be on the other.
Yes.
And tell us how the music made the difference.
Well, most times, as I said, we worked warehouses and barns, and 9 times out of 10, that didn't have what you call the second balcony. If we were lucky enough to play a county hall or an auditorium, sometime they had a balcony, and in that balcony was called the spectators. These were the whites who bought tickets to come in to hear the music, but were not allowed to come on the dance floor. Sometimes it was vice versa. The whites would be down and the blacks would be up in the balcony and not allowed to come down. But in places such as barns, warehouses, where there was just one level, they would separate the races with a rope. And I said a clothesline was what it was, an oversized clothesline. And most times someone had taken a huge cardboard and written colored, which was the definition of our ethnic group at that particular time.
Yes.
And on the other side, the card would say white. And the white spectators were allowed to dance on that side of the rope and the black on this side. But what they did not anticipate was that the music generated such a joy. People got to dancing, the ropes would fall down. I've seen it happen many times. And people would continue to dance and just wander into each other's space. Nobody would say a thing for a moment, and then it would occur to some official that, uh-oh, the rope is down. And they're dancing in the same space, and we can't have that. And then somebody would run up on the stage and say, stop the music. And they just stop the music and go back and put the rope in place. And you had to go back on your given side.
And the music was really trying to send the message, wasn't it?
Was at that time. You see, what people had control over where you could go, where you could sit. But the one thing about that music was that it was the radio, the disc jockeys who played that music, who were responsible for the music becoming what it was. And parents, unlike with today, with television, that they can change channel, they had no control over the radio dial, you see? And I've had many kids come to me and say they had to hide their radio, put the pillow over it, anything, so the parents would know what we were playing, But they could turn that dial and hear what was being done and enjoyed it, you see? And having to listen to a radio DJ now, unlike seeing everything visual on television, you had to use your imagination a little bit. And we had disc jockeys that were just funny, plain long funny and creative. They all had a character of their own, They had a slang talk, a way of speaking that, even myself in the beginning, I'd get up, and as soon as my daddy was out the house, and I couldn't see him going to work, I would switch the dial to a radio station that played a program called The Mailbag. My daddy didn't want us to hear it in the house, but as soon as he was out, that's where we'd turn it, to the mailbag. So radio was very, very important in that particular time. The DJs, you'd get into town and have to go into these radio stations and talk. And a lot of times people would not buy tickets because you bought tickets at the door. There was not all that much advance sale. What was done in advance was when the posters went up that you were coming into town. Those posters usually went up at least a month before you got there.
And that was done by a guy called a front man?
You know it. The front man is exactly right. And people would begin at that time to decide what they're going to wear to the dance because it was a special occasion. They'd start getting their outfits together. But you had to get in town and show yourself before they'd buy those tickets. because people worked hard. A lot of times people were sharecropping, and I worked dances where they came in and signed the book. They didn't have to buy the ticket. And a lot of times the landholder that they were working for was the one who was promoting the dance, you know. And they would come and sign that book, and at the end of the week or whatever, when they got paid, that was deducted.
I want to ask you something about this. You know, you said that the people really worked hard. And here's one thing I thought about rhythm and blues. You know, my father worked for a factory, Goodyear Tire and Rubber, for 26 years. And when they worked that hard, they were able to save a little bit of money to have some fun on Saturday night. Whoever the artist was that they were going to see, that artist had to make them feel like going back to work on Monday.
You better believe
Am I right?
it. You better believe it. Consequently, Louis Jordan came up with a tune called Saturday Night Fish Fry.
Yes.
Which was, in reality, what happened on Saturday night. And when they came out to the dances, as I said, it was something that they prepared for a long time before that. And what they did, not only did they dress up to come to those dances, but they also brought little boxes with food, you know, little beverage wrapped in little aluminum foil that they hid under the table, and some good fried chicken and some nice biscuits and some pies. All of that came to the dances. And it became sort of personalized, because I've had many people say to me, Miss Brown, they got to the place they could call you Ruth, and that was fine. Come to our table when you get through. And we did that so often, you know. It was really, really kind of personal at that time.
So in other words, you're saying that the music was powerful in the fact that the artist was on the same plane with his audience.
Exactly.
None of this superstar stuff the star pulls up in a Ferrari.
Touch them. They were reachable. They were reachable. Most times we toured in buses, station wagons, and then when you got so-called to the top of the ladder, which eventually happened in my case, there were those stars who did have the Cadillacs and whatnot, but you took it on your own. You chanced it to go to the Deep South with that kind of a vehicle. And I got arrested a couple of times. They locked the car up a couple of times, you know. And they wanted to know how you could afford that, even though I've had an experience, and when my book comes out, it will speak of an occasion on which we were going to Gulfport, Mississippi. Charles Brown, Paul Huckabuck Williams, and myself, and the police stopped us and said that we were doing like 30 miles an hour in a 25-mile zone, something like that, and made us all get out of our cars. And of course, these were nice cars, a couple of Chryslers, if things remind me right. Anyway, what we eventually had to do was, when we pulled out all the instruments, to prove that they weren't stolen, we had to do a concert on the side of the road, which was probably the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. I saw that in a movie recently.
The Five Heartbeats?
Yes. I don't know if it happened to them, but it happened to me. It did. And I was the only one standing there not doing anything. And my pianist, named Lee Anderson, who now is still alive in Seattle, I saw him a couple of years ago, we remembered that all of the musicians had taken out their instruments and were playing, you know, on the side of the road. And this tall policeman said to Lee Anderson, well, what do you play? And he said, I play piano. And he said, well, why aren't you not playing? There's no piano, you know. And in those days, we weren't carrying electric pianos like they do now. They carried the keyboards and whatnot, you know. And so the officer said, well, you got 5 seconds to start playing something.
Oh, that's
the
sad.
funniest thing happened. Intuitiveness, when it's about survival, you think of something. I never forget, the band was playing, and he leaned over the hood of the car and started playing on the hood of the car. And the police officers accepted that. He proved that he knew how to move his hands at least. And then last but not least, they looked at me, and I was standing there very arrogant. In those days, I didn't fear death. You understand? And they said, and who are you? And I was very vain. I said, I'm the person who pays all of these musicians, you know. I ended up singing on the side of the road. You know, he banished his pistol and put his hand on it and said, well, let me hear you sing something. And so there we were, all 7 of us standing on the side of the road as the cars were going by and going around or slowing down, doing this performance.
You know, there's a classic case of the police harassing Miles Davis because he had his beautiful Ferrari.
Yes.
He finally got this license plate that says, I own it.
I own it, yes, yes. Well, those things occurred quite often. I had fire set to my car in Birmingham, you know. We've had occasions to be stopped and taken to what we call night court, where the judge lived back in the woods somewhere. You didn't go to the station, you went to his house. And they tell you that you owed $200, $300, and they wanted it right then, and we've had to pay it in order to move, you know. Those are some of the reasons that caused me to be a little vain and arrogant and adamant about this music surviving, because the people who performed it paid a price for it, you know.
Yes, and I try to share that. I teach history of jazz class, and I try to share those things. I want to ask you something now about rhythm and blues as compared to gospel. People say it's the same chords, it's the same beat. One person said it's like the only difference is one guy's talking about God, one guy's talking about his girlfriend.
It's just changing the lyric.
Give us an example of a couple that were close.
You know, what you say is very true, and I find myself having to watch that when you do gospel, and especially the now generation gospel. I have to really closely listen to what's being said, you know, to kind of slow down and respect the fact that they're singing gospel. Unlike when I came along, my father was Methodist. My mother was Baptist. So I was christened as a Methodist as a baby, and I sang in that choir when I became of age. But each summer, when I had to work in the fields in cotton and tobacco, I was sent to North Carolina. My mother's people were Baptists. My grandmother refused to accept the fact that by having a few speckles of water dropped on my head, that meant anything spiritually. And so consequently, we were required to go to the mourner's bench. The mourner's bench, you had to sit there. The whole month of August was revival month.
Okay.
So you went to church in the morning. If you were a sinner, as the deacons called you, you sat on that mourner's bench while the older deacons walked around you and admonished you for not having received God. You see? And if and when you did, you stood up and shouted. Now, of course, we sat there so long that my sisters and I decided we were just going to hop up. We had rehearsed our chorus before we left house one day. We were tired of sitting there, so we hopped up at a given moment. You know, like the Rockettes we did, legs hopping and everything. Of course, my grandmother had a very keen eye, and she saw all of this, and she just gave us one look. You know, in those days, all they had to do was give you a look.
Yep.
You didn't have to say anything.
They just peek over them glasses.
That's right. Oh, you play with God, will you? You know? And by the time that she got through admonishing us, I said all that to say that there is this fine line, and it has to do with the lyric. Of course, there's a song that we do even now, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." In the church, we say, God is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I did a song once called "I Can See Everybody's Baby, But I Can't See Mine." The Dixie Hummingbirds did it, and it was called "I Can See Everybody's Mother, But I Don't See Mine." You see? It's just about the lyric. That's all it is. And even now, I can take any song and change one line, change one word, replace love or darling with God or our Father, and slow the tempo, lay it back, lay the tempo back, and it becomes gospel spiritual.
You know, there's a rendition of, I think, BB and CC doing "Lord Lift Us Up Where We Belong," which was a soundtrack
That's right.
from a movie.
That's right. Lord, lift us up where we belong. And it makes sense, wouldn't it?
Uh-huh.
That was from an officer and a gentleman.
Uh-huh.
The song.
Uh-huh.
It really was. Well, as I said, it's just the attitude that can change it, you know, like even coming up to sing gospel and there's a beat behind it. I made this statement that my mother used to say, if it moves your hip and not your soul, be careful. You know, but you really got to watch it nowadays because you'll find, without thinking, you will move your hips to the music, you know. I don't think that God cares.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, they had a little thing that they came up with in the Sanctified Church. And you know how when the music gets going or the sermon's good or the choir just got them singing a good number and the folk get to dance and get the
Oh, of course.
And now, but they said it wasn't dancing as long as you didn't cross your feet.
Don't cross your legs.
As long as you didn't pick that one foot up over the
Right.
other and cross it,
Right.
then they wasn't dancing.
Right. And it says, make the joyful noise unto the Lord. The many times that I used to play the Apollo Theater, the most urgent thing that would happen when the show was over, everybody would come out the stage entrance, which was on 126th Street, come around the block to 8th Avenue, past the Broderick Bar, and cross the street on the corner of 125th and 8th. Upstairs was Daddy Grace's church, and the windows were always open. Now, they had saxophone, drum, trombone, guitar, tambourines. If you wanted to hear music, people dancing in the streets down
And
under
the
the
tambourines
window.
with the heads on them, right?
Thank you. With
Not
the
just
heads
the ones
on,
you
not
shake.
that little ring.
Yeah, there you go.
You see, when I did a tune in 1953 called Mama Treat Your Daughter Mean, I played the tambourine with the head. I notice everybody now, but that tune, the introduction was 4 bars for nothing. That's the original entrance. But all the tambourines they use now, they take the head off, you know, put the hand through it in rings, you know, simpler. But that tambourine came out of the church, and it still does now.
Yes.
You know, if you want to hear the greatest, what I say, the greatest soul-searching music, you go to the Holiness Church, the Pentecostal.
Yep.
You know, that's where it is. They truly make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And most of your great R&B singers came out of that kind of setting.
You know, I want to ask you a question here as we kind of try to relate this to jazz. You say the music was expensive because it cost you something. And I was thinking, you know, seems to be a spiritual aspect even to the jazz. But a lot of preachers said, oh, that's the devil's music. But at the same time, many of those were the backup musicians for the R&B groups.
Oh, of course. John Coltrane was in my band. We went through the South. John Coltrane was in my band. He was in Paul Huckabuck Williams, who had the big record, the Huckabuck, before Chubby Checker got it and called it the Twist.
The Twist.
John Coltrane was in that band. I toured all through the South with Johnny Hodges. Richard, God, he was killed in the car, but Clifford Brown was my pianist.
Richard Powell.
Richard Powell was my pianist. You see, Bud Powell's brother, he was my pianist, you know. And I'm saying Kenny Burrell, all of them at one time or the other played that music, because that's the basis of everything that they do. You know, and if jazz indeed had its beginning in New Orleans, please, what was that? You know, the funerals, you got to see that. Have you ever seen one in New Orleans? Well, you know what that's like. If you can stay still, I bet you can, you know. But that's like the old people used to say, you rejoice at the going out and you weep at the coming in. And that's what that music is about. But there is a very fine line. I always said that I would suppose that truly the difference between the real jazz musician and the gospel or rhythm and blues artist is that the technique, the improvisation, they had to know a little something about the written note, I would think, because there were a few that I knew who had no knowledge of it. Wes Montgomery
You would know Wes Montgomery could not read.
could not read,
But he had
nor did Earl Garner.
He had a good ear, though, didn't
A
he?
great ear, you see, and I think that's, Dizzy Gillespie told me that once when I got a chance to go to Japan the very first time. I went to Japan with Dizzy Gillespie and the Modern Jazz Quartet and Sonny Stitt. And I was just so apprehensive because we were going to play the Budokan, and here I was, this rhythm and blues artist, you know. And Dizzy said, if you can hear it, you can sing it. And I could always hear it. I don't read either. Don't read a note, you know, but always there are a lot of pictures of me with looking at the music. It looks good. You know, it gives me status, you know, especially when I went to go into the studios with the likes of your Arnett Cobbs and your Count Basies and your Billy Ecksteins, and I got to be on tour with these great people. Whenever there was an opportunity to pose with them, there's always a piece of music, you know, made me look as though I knew. But no, it's really not necessary, especially like the music I'm proud to be a part of. It came from inside, you know.
Ask you a little more about Basie.
Yeah, have you worked with Count Basie?
Oh, I did.
And tell us about the sound of that band and how that worked in with the rhythm and blues kind of sound that you brought in your voice.
Well, I think when I worked with Basie, of course. I toured with Count Basie, George Shearer, and Billy Eckstein as a unit. I think that the Basie band was probably, of course it ended up being probably the most respected, along with the Ellington and Jimmy Lunchford Orchestra. In those days, we had dance bands. You see, in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, they had what was called the June German. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you ever do research on it, it was 5 days of dancing. Was called the June German. People traveled from everywhere to come there for that. Now, during those 5 days, you would find the likes of Buddy Johnson, great dance band, Earl Hines, Jimmy Lunchford, Erskine Hawkins, Lucky Millender, and Count Basie, of course, Ellington on occasion. But for the dance marathons, and that's what they were, these were the chosen dance band. Now, the Basie band was the one band that rhythmatically, you could not beat that. You know, it was just there. The secret of that, you know, was Freddie Green. People don't talk about that, but that was the secret of the Basie band.
Well, you know,
Green.
other artists have come in here and we've talked about the Basie band and they've said those exact words.
Of course.
It's like they read it off a script.
Of course, it's there. And he sat beside Basie over 40 years. And when Basie passed, he didn't live long after that.
That was his
Freddie
life.
Green, that was his life. I saw him, he said, well, Basie's gone, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And sure enough. But he sat there for over 40 years playing that choo, 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 choo. That was the Basie band. You see? The simpler, the better.
Uh-huh.
The simpler, the better. And of course, Basie, he was such a wonderful individual. You know, I think the thing about those days that was really great was there was no competitiveness.
Uh-huh.
Whatever was good for the show, that's what we did. We toured together, we rode the buses together. We lived under the same circumstances. We ate under the same circumstances. And when you went to the stage at night, it was a combined effort.
Uh-huh.
You know, it wasn't about who can outdo the other. It's like, we're here as a unit. Let's make those people who bought the tickets glad they came. And let's have them ask when will we be back again, you know. I think that was the thing that I remember most about it, you know. And I worked with Basie many, many times.
Have you had an opportunity to either sing on the same program with or privy to the personal sounds of Joe Williams?
Well, of course. Joe was in a band when we was touring together. And, of course, we now live in the same town in Vegas. Joe's been living there quite a while. In fact, the last time I saw him, we did the tribute for Peggy Lee. And Joe, again, is like what I call the master blues singer. He is the master, the most not predictable, but really predictable. You almost know where he's going musically, you know, and I think one of the greater voices that I've ever heard is Joe Williams. And he still remains that way. Very proud to that effect. He doesn't, how should I say, he has not prostituted that particular sound that he has, that style that he has. He's just true blues singer. Every day I have the blues is his. I don't care who else does it. You know what I'm saying? And going to Chicago, sorry I can't take you. You understand? Ain't nothing in Chicago that a monkey person can do. That belongs to Joe Williams, yeah. Yes, I know him very well, and proud to say I know him.
A couple of other things I'd like to ask you. If you had some words to the wise to say to young jazz singers coming up about the real essence of the music, what would you share?
Well, as I said before, I'm not a technical musician as far as the written note is concerned. But what I have aspired to do, now that I'm being accepted in that gender as a jazz singer in some places, is to, first of all, as a vocalist, pay attention to what comes out of your mouth, what you are saying, the written word. You know, as I say, technically, a lot of people who can read music can just pick up a lead sheet and sing the song. But your job is to make that song apply to someone. Try to be as true to the melody as you can. One of the things over the years I learned in listening to all the great singers, there are a lot of them that I've attempted to emulate, but there's one that I am not stupid enough to try, and that's Ella Fitzgerald. The lady is without a doubt the greatest that I ever heard. Technically, the one thing I've never tried to do is scat sing. Even though Ella told me she started that when she was singing and forgot the lyric one day and couldn't think of anything else to do. So she started to scat. But all the great singers like Carmen McRae, Sarah Vaughan, my friend Dinah Washington, all of these ladies, Aretha, even now, all played piano. They were musicians. I couldn't do that. So I had to pay attention to the word and the melody. And I find that to be a source of being able to handle the song. To me, if I pay attention to what's coming out, at this point, I just attempt to make a person listen to what I'm saying, to make it believable, you know, or to have someone come up and say, you know, I've heard that song done a lot of times, but when you sang it, I really felt it, you know. I think that is the payback for that. A lot of times, I have a respect for every music. I can find something in all of it. But there have been some occasions that it gets a little abstract. If I can't hear the melody, if I can't feel the beat, let me say. You know, I think that comes from the R&B training, that you feel the beat. It's always there. It's always there. And when I lose that sometime, I kind of stand. I couldn't say that I would stand up and be able to sing with Arnett Coleman. You know, I respect him, but I don't think that I could vocalize. And there is that difference, you know. There are a lot of wonderful musicians who are fantastically good in what they do, but very few have a knack for accompanying a singer. There is a difference in accompanying a singer to give her room, space for what it is.
And yet support.
And yet support. And you can't always find that.
It's a special skill, isn't it?
That is. It's a special skill.
Now, you tell me, am I wrong? Where I found the greatest accompanist for singers is in the black church.
Oh, why? Of course. Of course. Because we're not in a hurry. And that's what I tell everybody. Where you going? Take your time. Slow down. Listen to what you're saying. Not only should it feed off and affect somebody else, it should feed back on you. It's like looking in the mirror. You know, you used to always look in the mirror when you talk to yourself because it's going to feed back on you. You see, you'll feel it. Same way with your music. If you sing it and it's heartfelt, you'll get that too. I've been on stage sometime, and some nights are different than others. You know, you can focus on someone in your audience and get really locked into them. You know, you get eye contact, and you realize that they're really listening to what you're singing, and before you know it, you're hearing yourself. As I've said, I call it my older days, in my twilight years, I've started to collect and listen to some of my recordings. I never did listen to my own stuff that much, but I've started to listen to some of it now. Some of it's pretty good, but some of it is awful, you know.
Tell us one of the ones that's pretty good. Tell us one of the ones that you think is classic.
I did an album in 1965. Called Ruth Brown 65 on Mainstream. The company went out of business. The record has been reissued this year on Sony under a new name. It's now called Softly. And in that album, I did Here's That Rainy Day. I did Why Do You Whisper Green Grass, which was an old Bill Kenny tune from the Ink Spots, you know, which dates back to my youth. And in that I also did Porgy, I Love You Porgy, things I had forgotten that I had ever touched on, you know. And I was listening to that album, I said, I didn't sound bad, you know. And then you go back and get some things like Lucky Lips and This Little Girl's Gone Rockin', and I wrote my mom a letter when I had long, sickly curls, and right now it sounds kind of ridiculous. You know, they say, would you sing that song? Are you kidding? I don't know what made me sing it then, you know. Okay. But it does make a difference.
One last thing I would like to ask you. Who's coming up on the scene now as young R&B artists that you think has their thumb on the pulse of the great traditions?
Well, I tell you, there's a fine line now. A lot of the people that are being categorized as R&B singers, I don't know. The category is strange and different now, you know. But I tell you, I admire Lita Adams. Wherever she's been, I like her. I've heard some things by Toni Braxton. I like her a little bit. And I always slide back into Aretha on some things. She just refuses to go away, I say. You know, when she's right, she's just right, you know. But there are a lot of the new artists that I'm not familiar with. I have to talk to my daughter about that, and she brings me up to what's going on in the new voices. And there are those that I hear and can't identify by name, you know. The music is still good. There's some things that don't touch me, but fortunately, you can always turn the dial. You can take the record, the compact disc out. You don't have to be required to listen to it. I like groups like Take Six. Love them very much. And I like some of the things that BB and CeCe Winans are doing. I don't know who else I can really touch on right now. You know, I like Luther Ingram. Is that his name, Luther Ingram?
Luther Vandross?
Not Luther Vandross, I know Vandross.
You talking about James Ingram?
James Ingram.
I went to high school with James.
You did?
Yeah.
Yes, I like him, of course. Now, listen to him, all you got to do is turn on Michael Bolton and you hear all of his style. Michael Bolton's doing it, thank you, you know. But nonetheless, there are a lot of artists that I still maintain a lot of respect for. I like Luther Vandross also, you know. But I think if I had a preference, I'd like James Ingram.
I'll get word to James on that. He'll appreciate
Would you do that?
He'll be flattered by that.
All right, I like it very much.
Well, we're going to conclude this portion of our interview right now. We have been very flattered to get some incredible information from Ruth Brown. And we hope to continue this and build this archive over several years at Hamilton College. It has been an honor.
The privilege has been mine. Thank you.